Inverter project is finally done.
I didn't do a damn thing to help.
Today's video, we've had a lot of requests for.
A lot.
And honestly, it's my fault that it hasn't been put out yet. The inverter project itself was super long because it's a lot of work.
A long time.
I'm going to talk about how I broke that down.
This is basically all him because I didn't do anything of it.
You might have flipped the breaker here and there.
Okay.
Okay.
I flipped a breaker here and there, but no, this is his doing. He did all the hard work. I have really no idea about stuff that he's going to talk about to you because I don't understand it.
This is not going to be a super detailed technical lesson in converting watts to amps and all that stuff. There's plenty of resources on the internet. I'll put some links below. This is going to talk about how we're set up, how I installed it, and more importantly, how I did our install without disrupting our life. I can't just have our electricity turned off for days on end, and this project can take days on end. It's quite a bit of work, as you'll see.
Yeah.
So first of all, what is an inverter versus a converter? A lot of people.
I actually don't know this.
A converter converts AC to DC power, and that DC power is used to charge your battery or batteries, as well as supply DC power for your rig. Most rigs, all of your lighting, sometimes your refrigerator, if you're running it on gas and electric, or running it on gas, a lot of a fifth wheel toy hauler is designed to run off DC power. So you don't have to be connected to power to do simple things like lights,
right,
fans, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's all a converter does. It's not designed to go the other way. An inverter takes DC power and makes AC to run things like coffee pot, television,
yes,
Apple TV,
yes,
microwave for a little while,
yes,
and sometimes an AC.
Yes.
So that's what an inverter does, and that's the difference. It'll also typically do the converter's job and provide DC power from AC to charge your batteries. You want to make sure, man, it's friggin' wind.
Yeah. Do you think we should just take this inside?
We're going to meet you inside the rig because it's freaking windy out here.
It's too windy out here, so we're going in. We're inside.
Woo! Okay, much better in here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why we needed an inverter. First of all, you don't need an inverter, but
we need it.
We need an inverter. So here's what we found. In our first few weeks of owning our rig, we were boondocking at my buddy's house, and we had to run the generator for everything. If we wanted to make a pot of coffee, turn on the generator. If we wanted to watch TV at night, generator.
And I have a problem with that because the generator is right underneath our bed.
Yeah.
And I don't like noise like that. And you have the generator running right below you. I found that quite annoying.
Right. So we knew right away we wanted an inverter. There are a lot of inverters out there. And doing a lot of research, lots and lots of research, the install can be pretty complicated. The reason being 50 amp power comes in on two legs of 120 volts. Technically it's 50 amps on each leg. A lot of inverters can only handle one leg, meaning you have to do some special work with your wiring and split off one of your legs to a breakout panel and another one to your inverter, and then you got to figure out how to rejoin them. You have to figure out which outlets, which things you want to power, because when the 50 amp comes into our main fuse panel down here, it splits off into leg 1 and leg 2 and then things that are on those legs. So for instance, one of the ACs is on one leg, 2 are on another, the microwave's on one while some of the other outlets are on another, and it would be a pain to figure all that out. So I found the GoPower GP IC 2000 PKG comes with what's called full 50 amp pass-through. And what that allows me to do is just run both legs into the inverter, both legs out. I don't have to figure out what we want to run, what we don't want to run. Basically, we could turn on every freaking thing in this rig on our inverter. Granted, it would overload the inverter, so we still have to be mindful of what we turn on, what we don't. But I don't have to worry about it as far as the wiring goes, and I'll show you that when I get to each phase of the install.
That hurts my brain. That hurts my brain. I kind of feel like I hear wah, 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 wah. I think I'm just gonna hand this over to him now because I don't have anything to add other than I really like to be able to make coffee and watch TV without having the loud generator on.
Right.
So I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Right. I'm gonna take you outside and we're gonna walk through this thing, how I did it step by step. I'm gonna show you each piece of it and how I did it and all that good stuff.
Sweet.
So as Tara and I were saying, because we live in our rig, I didn't want to, nor could I really have everything apart all in one day or 2 days in a row. You know, when you're working on an inverter and you're dealing with electrical wiring, you got to shut everything off. Imagine living in your house without power for 2 or 3 days. Your wife would not be happy. Mine would not be. So I took this project and I thought about what I could do in certain steps ahead of time. What steps I could do without turning off power. The first step, I had to turn off DC power and some AC power, but the first step was the batteries. I had to upgrade the batteries. Now there were two major things to consider with these batteries. A, the weight of them. They're about 62 pounds each, so with 4 of them I'm looking at about 250 pounds. After a little bit of research online, I found that some people who had put heavier batteries in their front bay here, which is where all the DC wiring goes, so it's not used, this area would be kind of silly, they had problems with the floor here sinking. You know, it's basically, you've got frame, and then it's just sheet metal in between. So my first goal was to shore up the battery area with some angle irons, actually angle aluminums, I don't know what you'd call them, but I put 3 supports along under here and bolted those to the frame, provide more support for this battery area. I don't want to have to worry about it popping out of the bottom of our rig while going down I-80. The other major concern or thing that I had to take into account was a battery box. Batteries, especially flooded cell, need to be sealed and vented. It's kind of the conflicting ideas, but you want it sealed so that battery gases can't be released up into this area here, because if you notice here, I have a little machine that makes a bunch of explosions to generate power. So mixing those two together is not good. The battery that came with the rig had a battery box, but obviously it's just designed for one battery. What I came up with was this tote from Home Depot. It fits all 4 of those batteries very snugly, but well. And then basically I took the top and bottom vent pieces of the box that came with the rig, I cut them out, I glued them to this, I put everything together, and boom, I've got a battery box. The other thing that I did when I put this battery box in was bolt it to the floor of the bay, which actually worked out fine because of the supports I put through there. I bolted it straight through into those supports, also through the floor, so it's very, very secure. So the other thing that I wanted to consider when I built this battery box is I wanted accessibility. So I didn't want the cables coming in through the top like they were with the original battery box, because taking the top of the battery box off would then be difficult. I don't want that to be difficult because I want to be able to service these batteries regularly, check the water levels. So what I did was I ran all the cables in through the top edge of the box. That way the top itself is movable. I got 8 screws, I think, securing the thing on, and I can pop that off. I've got it loose here, and I can get to my batteries whenever I need to. Also, if you're curious, this is just a plain 22-gallon tote from Home Depot. Works great for 4 Trojan T105s. The reason I went with Trojan T105s is they did get very good ratings. But I got a good deal on them. They're good solid batteries. I didn't want to spend thousands of dollars on just batteries, although that would be great. Wasn't in the budget. So the second step in my phased install was a non-disruptive phase, and that was to wire the control cables or run the control cables. That was probably the hardest part of this whole process. If you can see in here, it's just a big spaghetti mess of wires. This originally was in the middle here, so I had to move that down to make room for this panel. At the same time, I put in this EMS control panel. That'll be a separate video, but I ran both those wires at the same time for convenience. So I tried fish tape. I tried those long, like fiberglass stick things. I tried all kinds of things to try to get this wiring through. And what I ended up doing was using a bunch of slack. So down in the basement, where all these control cables go and meet the control boxes down there for this interface and for the lights and all that stuff, the brains down there, there's a lot of slack down there. Now, initially when I saw that, I was like, oh man, look at all this wiring. It's not in the way or anything. And a lot of people complain about wiring and stuff, but it saved me. So I was able to figure out one of these cables in here had tear a tug on while I followed it down below to see which cable it was. These wires go back and then over and then down. So getting a fish tape through there was not going to happen. I pulled all the slack through down into the basement, taped up both control cables. Both of these control cables were essential little phone jack cables on the end. So I staggered them, taped them up real good to the source wire, and then I just yanked on them, pulled them through, and it worked, thank God. I knew that by itself was going to take some time, so I made that its own step. So the third step, which also was a non-interruptive, non-disruptive step, was to just mount physically the inverter where I wanted it to go. So choosing where to install the inverter was its own little research project. My initial thought that I would do was I was going to put it up in the bay where the converter is currently, thinking, okay, well, it's doing inverting and converting, it can just replace it and sit in there. However, one of the major considerations when doing this is distance from the batteries. Because the inverter has the potential to draw a lot of current, we're talking 300 amps here, the inverter has to be very close to the batteries. Because I had sealed the battery box very well, I was able to co-locate it in the same space right up here. So that way I could keep my cable run short, I could keep everything right here in one tight little area, and not have to worry about it. So I wanted to put it on top of this enclosure here for the generator, but I didn't want it just sitting on this metal, just like I didn't want the battery box just sitting on the metal. And that was a pretty easy solution. I just got some 2x4s and cut them the whole length, and you can see probably the screws right here. I screwed those boards straight through and then mounted the inverter to those boards. It distributes the weight across the entire top of the generator compartment, and I feel a lot better about it being up there. The next non-disruptive step was to install this control panel. To do that, I had to take this panel here, the LCI 1 control, and move it down. It actually was pretty easy because if you look here, the frame of the mounting bracket actually only covers the lower portion of this. So originally this thing was topped off right here. Obviously that wasn't going to work to fit that in there. So I was able to move it down by cutting some extra length down just on the bottom section here, moving this mounting bracket down, and then just mounting this guy right there, which left me room for this and for my EMS. And this is obviously a pretty simple install. I just cut the area out that I needed and put the screws in. So after I got the control panels mounted, my next step was also non-interruptive, and that was to do my DC wiring. And my plan and what I did was to get all the DC wiring in place, but just leave the cables disconnected and just sitting in here. Again, trying to think of steps that I could do and not have to turn off our power. That seemed like the logical next step was to get my cable runs done. I made my own cables. I used welding cable. Now the difference between welding cable and regular DC cabling is stiffness. The welding cable is made up of many, many tiny little strands, whereas standard cable would be bigger, thicker strands. And the reason being is that the thinner strands, the welding cable, is very pliable. It's very soft and bendable. So I measured out what I needed, and I knew I also needed to mount my fuse and my cutoff switch up in this bay here. So that's what I did. I had the inverter already mounted, of course. So I made my cables to custom length. To do that, I had to buy a special crimper. You don't want to, I've seen videos online of people doing soldering and things like that. You don't want to do that. I didn't want to do that. I've read bad things about it. You don't want any air in that connection, especially talking about 300 amps of DC. You want a nice solid crimp. So I bought a nice hydraulic crimper. I bought the wire ends and lugs, and I made my own cables. So as you can see here, I've got my positive side that runs straight from the inverter down and up to cutoff switch, and the cutoff switch goes to the fuse, and then I just let that wire hang until I was ready to hook it up. So I got that wiring all in place, and then I basically just let it hang out in here. The other thing that I did during this step was to take my battery temperature sensor, which had about a mile-long cable on it, and I shortened it because it only has to go from here to here. But, you know, they give you lots of cable in case you need it. I didn't want to just have that cable all wrapped up in here, and I already had the tools to basically cut and crimp a new phone cable, because that's all that control cable is. It's a 4-wire phone cable to an RJ15 jack, just like a phone jack. So I already had the tools. I even already had some RJ15 connectors from back in my network wiring days. You know, I had some RJ15, RJ45 sitting in a bag just in case. And if you're wondering what RJ15 and RJ45 are, RJ15 are the tiny phone connectors, and RJ45 are the bigger network connectors that you'll see on network cables. So the final part of the non-disruptive installation was to get my AC wiring in. So AC wiring is a lot easier than DC wiring, simply because DC wiring, you've got to have a lot higher power and a lot thicker cable to go the same distance you might with AC cabling, which is why Nikola Tesla was right and Edison was wrong. Just a little AC-DC history there. Basically, my goal here was just to get the AC wiring hooked up to the inverter and in place and laying up in here. So just a little review on how the AC wiring is set up here by default. We have AC wiring coming in from the side of the rig where you plug into your 50-amp power. That typically comes straight into an ATS, or an automatic transfer switch. I have it routed through an EMS. We'll do a separate video on that install, which is a surge protection, voltage protection. It's yeah, we'll go into that later. The ATS also has an input from the generator, and then coming out of the ATS, automatic transfer switch, it goes to the distribution panel, which is right over there, and the front of which is inside the rig where you have all your breakers. And that, of course, distributes things out through the rig. So what I needed to do was take the output from the ATS and run it up and over and across to the inverter, and then come from the inverter back over to the distribution panel. Basically, I'm putting the inverter between shore power or generator power, because it's coming in after the ATS, and the distribution panel. For AC wiring in this rig, it's really not much different than household wiring. I used 6-3 Romex, which is basically 6-gauge 3 wires. It's got hot 1, hot 2, and a neutral, and of course a ground, so it's really 4 wires, but that's not what it's called. You can get that at any Home Depot, Lowe's, any home improvement store. I hooked them up to the inverter. I drilled a hole right up here. I ran the cables across above the supports for the furnace ducting and up to the front, and I just let those wires hang. I ran those cables along with the control cable, because remember, the control cable was just sitting down in here after I had run it through to the front. So I ran the control cable that way, and I ran the AC cables that way. Anywhere that I put cabling, whether it's DC or AC, I put shielding around it. You know, this thing bounces down the road at 60, 65 miles an hour when it's an earthquake. It's an earthquake for your wiring as well. So where I've got cables run up over these supports and everything, I don't want those things rubbing. I've got all of my cabling shielded, whether it's the DC or the AC stuff up in the front compartment for the battery. The AC wiring here, it's all shielded. So at this point in the project, everything's basically in place and just laying there. Everything's pretty much ready to go. So I picked a time. It was a nice cool day because I could turn the AC and power off, shut off shore power, disconnected shore power, shut off battery power through my battery disconnect here, and basically made sure the coach was dead, make sure there's no juice on any of the connectors, any of the lines, and then it was just a matter of hooking things up. So that basically entailed running my 6-3 Romex up to the distribution panel. Distribution panel is really easy. There's a cover, pops off, 4 screws, pop that off. You can pull the whole distribution panel out. I removed the wiring that was existing coming from the ATS and plugged it in. It was simple. It's 4 wires and screws. It's not that difficult. Just got to make sure you route it through the appropriate sensors so it can sense current. You don't lose any of that functionality. And the DC cables is just a matter of popping the top off the battery box and running my cables into the sides, sealing them up, and connecting the batteries. Also, as part of this, since my inverter is also a converter, in other words, it's an inverter / battery charger, I no longer need the stock converter that came with the rig. I didn't completely remove it. I wanted to keep it in the rig just in case I need it. But if you look at it, it's basically right down here on the floor, and it gets its power from an outlet that's on the floor in here in this belly of the beast. And so I just unplugged it, I threw the breaker, and that way if I ever have a problem with the inverter and I need to go back to the old converter just to get DC power to charge the batteries and run things in the rig, it's still there. All I got to do is plug it in, I might even be able to reach it through this panel here. Plug it in, hit the breaker, and I'm good. You don't want two sources of DC power trying to charge your batteries and fighting each other, and I don't even know what would happen. It might cause a rift in the space-time continuum, and we'd go into the future or something. I don't know what would happen. 21 gigawatts! So at this point, it was just a matter of powering the thing on and testing. So I'm going to use the microwave as a test, just to see if it gets power. I'm not going to try turning on the microwave and drawing a lot of juice. So I am going to throw all my breakers except for the microwave. That's the converter, which I just disconnected. So I'm going to throw all of them. I'm going to throw the main. Let's see, microwave. There is the microwave running off the inverter. We're not even connected to shore power. So if we hit the inverter off, then the microwave should go off.
Off.
Microwave's off.
Microwave's off.
We're going to connect shore power, make sure the microwave comes on. Rule number 327 in camping. Always assume there's a hornet's nest inside this thing.
Is there one?
Well, there was a wasp nest.
Because you know I'm allergic.
Okay, it's gone. Nope, this part should be fine. I don't think it's for that, but... Alright, so let's see what we got on our indicator here.
Yep, indeed the microwave is on.
Alrighty, so...
Okay.
Apply AC shore power, did that, 10 seconds, boom, that kicked on, that's on. The inverter is currently off because AC shore power is powering the light bulb, aka the microwave. Press and release the on-off switch to turn on the inverter. So now I can remove shore power and this should all stay on. Inverter should kick in. So while I go do that, pull the breaker out there, keep an eye on this in the microwave.
We're on DC status.
Microwave stay on?
Microwave stayed on.
That's pretty cool. That's it, we're done. That's all I got to do. So right now, shore power is off. What else can we turn on? Let's turn the TV on. Well, let me flip the rest of my breakers here. Now I can see I'm drawing 43.8 amps from the batteries to for the inverter.
You gonna try TV?
Yeah, I'll see if the TV and stuff works.
Okay. Are you proud of Daddy? Why are you giving me side eye?
But this is cool.
You did a good
This is really what we wanted. Freaking TV on DC power. The Apple TV is working, the TV's working, their stuff's charging.
This is a project long time in the making. You did a lot of work on this.
Drawing 63 amps. Let's turn the coffee pot.
Okay, turn it on.
Ooh, we jumped up to 150 amps.
Oh, that coffee maker drew what, 90? Because it was 62. And then you turn on the coffee pot.
Yeah. Now let's kick this off. You can see the lights got
crazy.
The lights got a little dim when I turned the coffee pot on. Let me go kick shore power back on. DC status should go into a positive range and go into charging. And the TV and all that stuff should all stay on.
Okay.
Come on here, click over out here.
I heard it. Bulk charging.
There it goes.
Okay, yeah. Now it's positive. Everything's still on. See? Microwave, TV, boom.
Now we're bulk charging. That's pretty freaking cool.
You did it. He did it all by himself.
The inverter project is finally done.
I didn't do a damn thing to help.
It's bulk charging at 80 amps. That's so cool. It's going to charge it so fast. So after getting everything installed and tested, there's still a little bit of tweaking that needs to be done, namely the settings for our batteries. You essentially need to tell the inverter what kind of batteries you have and how you want them to be charged. So you'll want to do a little research on this part with your battery manufacturer to make sure you get these settings right. If I would have followed just the instructions from the Go Power manual, I would have been charging these things at a much higher rate than I should have. The formula that they gave me basically came out to 80% charge, meaning 80 of the 100 of total available watts for charging, meaning 80 watts of the available 100 watts for charging. So I contacted Trojan Batteries and basically gave them a list of all the settings that I could tweak on this control panel and asked them for their recommendations. So the settings that I made were the battery type, which is flooded cell. Of course, you can also have it set for AGM and a couple of different types, and you can even do a custom charging profile if perhaps you have lithium batteries or something fancy like that. Another setting that I confirmed with Trojan is the maximum charge time. For this particular setup, which was the 4 Trojan T105s, if you remember, is 12 hours max charge time. Oh, hopefully that wasn't too over the top complex and crazy and not too long, but I've been promising to get this out for a while, so there it is.
Yeah.
Bottom line, what's the bottom line?
Well, the bottom line is I appreciate all your hard work that you did, first of all. It's added to the comforts of our life.
Right.
And the great thing is when we do boondock or mooch dock like we're doing right now, we don't have to have that generator running all the time. I'm sure that the neighbors next door are happy about that too.
Right. And a lot of times when you're in close proximity, you just want to be courteous, and you don't want to be running your generator at 10 o'clock at night to watch I Love Lucy reruns. We never watch I Love Lucy reruns. I don't know why I said that.
That's weird.
You don't want to be running your generator late at night for anything.
Right.
I want to thank GoPower. We're in no way affiliated with them, but I do recommend that inverter, and they've been super with their support.
Yeah.
Primarily Bob. That's who you'll get probably if you email support or call support. You'll get Bob. He's awesome. I went through our planned install with them before I ever did it to make sure everything was on the up and up, and they were really super helpful and very responsive.
Well, and that's important when you're doing a big project like this.
Yeah. A couple of future things I do have coming up. I do plan on putting a Victron Bluetooth battery monitor, shunted, and I'll explain that in that video, but a much better battery monitor. So we do want to do solar at some point. Obviously, solar is just another piece to the power picture.
Yeah,
power
but
picture.
it's expensive.
Yeah, it's pretty expensive. And we don't boondock that much now to really take advantage of it, but we will probably next year.
We're heading out west next year, so we'll probably need it a lot more often, I would assume.
Yeah. We hope you liked this how-to video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please click the like button.
That's right.
And if you have any questions at all, comment below, and I will get back to you as quickly as I can.
Don't forget that we're on Instagram and Facebook.
Yep.
So follow us there too.
Yep. See ya.